Imagine that tonight, instead of closing your eyes in the present, you quietly drift back more than 50 years into the heart of Texas. The highways are quieter, the nights are darker, and the stars seem brighter than they do today. As we slowly walk through the forgotten Texas of the 1970s, you'll discover the real lives, peaceful towns, and quiet moments that history has gently left behind. In the 1970s, Texas was a state balancing tradition and change. While cities like Houston and Dallas continued to grow, countless small towns still moved at a gentle pace, where neighbors knew one another by name. Life wasn't rushed, and every sunrise brought familiar routines that had remained almost unchanged for generations.
Long before the morning traffic filled the roads, ranchers, farmers, and oil workers were already beginning their day. The cool air carried the scent of fresh earth, cut hay, and distant cattle grazing across wide open fields. For many Texans, the sunrise marked not just the start of work, but the rhythm of a simple and deeply connected way of life.
Across rural Texas, wooden farmhouses stood quietly beneath enormous skies. Front porches were more than places to sit. They were where families shared stories, children laughed, and neighbors stopped by without needing an invitation. As evening approached, the gentle creak of rocking chairs became part of the soundtrack of everyday life. The local general store was often the heart of each community. People came not only to buy groceries or supplies, but also to exchange news, discuss the weather, and catch up with friends. In many towns, these conversations connected the community more effectively than any newspaper ever could.
Texas roads looked very different half a century ago. Long stretches of highway crossed endless plains, where travelers could drive for miles without seeing another car. Gas stations, roadside diners, and small motels became welcome resting places for families and truck drivers making long journeys across the state.
For children growing up in Texas during the 1970s, life unfolded mostly outdoors. They rode bicycles through quiet neighborhoods, explored open fields, climbed trees, and played until the sun slowly disappeared below the horizon. Entertainment came from imagination rather than screens. Although television had become common, evenings were still centered around family. After dinner, many households gathered together to watch a favorite program before spending the rest of the night talking, reading, or simply enjoying the peaceful silence of home. The pace of life encouraged conversation instead of constant distraction. The oil industry remained one of the defining forces shaping Texas. Oil fields provided jobs, built communities, and influenced local economies across the state. Yet behind the busy drilling operations were ordinary families whose daily lives reflected resilience, hard work, and hope for a better future. As night settled across the Texas countryside, Countless stars appeared above the open landscape with remarkable clarity. Far from the bright lights of modern cities, the silence felt almost endless, broken only by the distant calls of insects and the soft whisper of the prairie wind. It was a peaceful ending to another ordinary day in the forgotten Texas of the 1970s. By the early 1970s, Texas had become one of America's fastest-growing states. New neighborhoods appeared around expanding cities, while many rural communities continued to preserve traditions that had existed for decades. It was a time when the old and the new quietly shared the same landscape. In small Texas towns, Friday evenings carried a special meaning. Families gathered beneath bright stadium lights to watch local high school football games, cheering for neighbors, classmates, and relatives. These events were less about competition and more about bringing entire communities together. The family ranch remained at the center of life for many Texans. Before sunrise, ranchers cared for cattle, repaired fences, and rode horseback across vast stretches of land. Their work demanded patience, strength, and a deep respect for the changing seasons. Churches played an important role in everyday life throughout Texas. Sunday mornings filled quiet streets with families dressed in their best clothes, greeting friends before services began. Beyond worship, churches often served as gathering places where neighbors supported one another during both joyful and difficult times. Education looked very different from today's digital classrooms. Chalkboards covered the walls, handwritten assignments filled notebooks, and libraries were treasured places for learning. Teachers encouraged curiosity through books, discussions, and face-to-face conversations rather than computer screens. Across Texas, local diners became familiar meeting places from early morning until late evening. Farmers, truck drivers, teachers, and business owners often shared breakfast at neighboring tables, exchanging stories over coffee and homemade meals. These quiet routines helped strengthen the bonds within every community. Music floated through homes, pickup trucks, and small-town dance halls across the state. Country music, Western ballads, and folk songs reflected everyday experiences, celebrating family, hard work, and the beauty of rural life. For many Texans, music was simply another part of daily living. The wide Texas landscape changed with every season. Spring covered fields with colorful wildflowers, while the hot summer sun stretched long shadows across ranches and highways. Autumn brought cooler evenings, and winter arrived gently across much of the state, rarely staying for very long. Although large cities continued to modernize, many neighborhoods still enjoyed a slower rhythm of life. Children walked safely to nearby schools, bicycles rested in front yards without concern, and neighbors often knew every family living along their street. Trust remained an ordinary part of everyday life. As another peaceful evening settled over Texas, porch lights slowly glowed against the fading sky. Families finished supper. Gentle conversations drifted through open windows, and the distant sound of crickets filled the warm night air. It was a quiet reminder that some of history's most meaningful moments were also its simplest. The early morning markets were an important part of life across many Texas communities. Farmers arrived before sunrise with fresh vegetables, fruits, eggs, and homemade goods, greeting familiar faces along the way. These markets were not only places to shop, but also places where friendships quietly grew over many years. Traveling across Texas in the 1970s required both patience and curiosity. The state stretched across hundreds of miles, offering endless prairies, rolling hills, winding rivers, and quiet desert landscapes. Every journey revealed another small town with its own traditions and unique local character. Many families still passed practical skills from one generation to the next. Parents taught children how to repair fences, grow gardens, prepare traditional meals, and care for animals. These lessons were shared through everyday life rather than formal instruction, creating memories that lasted for decades. Public libraries served as peaceful places where people escaped into history, adventure, and imagination. Shelves were filled with books that connected readers to distant places and forgotten times, while librarians patiently helped every visitor discover something new. For many children, the library became the beginning of a lifelong love of learning. The skies above Texas often became a daily source of conversation. Ranchers watched the clouds carefully, hoping for gentle rain after long periods of dry weather, while families planned outdoor activities around the changing forecast. Nature quietly influenced nearly every part of life across the state. Small-town festivals brought neighbors together throughout the year. Local musicians performed familiar songs. Homemade food filled the air with comforting aromas. And children enjoyed simple games beneath colorful decorations. These celebrations reflected the warmth and hospitality for which Texas had long been known. Evenings often unfolded at a slower pace than they do today. After the day's work was finished, families gathered on front porches to watch the sunset, share stories, and enjoy the cool breeze. Without constant digital distractions, conversations became one of the most treasured parts of daily life. Texas wildlife was a familiar presence across the countryside. White-tailed deer moved quietly through wooded areas. Songbirds welcomed each morning with gentle melodies. And coyotes could sometimes be heard in the distance after dark. These sounds blended naturally into the peaceful rhythm of rural life. Although the world beyond Texas was changing rapidly during the 1970s, many local communities continued to value kindness, hard work, and neighborly support above all else. People celebrated together during joyful moments and stood beside one another during difficult times. This quiet sense of community became one of the state's greatest strengths. As another day came to a gentle close, the Texas sky slowly filled with countless stars stretching from one horizon to the other. The warm breeze carried only the soft sounds of nature, while quiet homes settled into peaceful silence. In that calm darkness, the forgotten Texas of the 1970s seemed almost timeless, inviting us to rest before continuing our journey. As the 1970s drew toward their final years, Texas continued to change, but many of its quiet traditions remained untouched. Families still valued simple routines, honest work, and evenings spent together rather than rushing from one place to another. In many ways, these ordinary moments became the true heart of Texas history.
The small railroad stations that had once connected distant towns still played a role in many communities. Freight trains rolled slowly across the countryside, carrying cattle, grain, timber, and supplies through the vast Texas landscape. Their distant whistles became a familiar sound that echoed across the open plains, especially after sunset.
Many historic buildings from earlier generations were still standing in the 1970s. Old courthouses, brick storefronts, and weathered wooden homes quietly reminded residents of the pioneers and settlers who had helped shape the state. Every building carried stories that were rarely written down, but often remembered by local families. Texas was already known for its remarkable natural beauty. From the rolling hills of the hill country to the forests of East Texas and the wide deserts of the West, each region offered its own peaceful landscape. These places encouraged people to slow down, breathe deeply, and appreciate the quiet beauty surrounding them. Looking back today, one of the greatest differences is not simply the technology that has changed, but the pace of everyday life. Letters often took days to arrive, photographs had to be developed, and patience was simply part of living. Time seemed to move more gently, allowing people to notice the small details that are often missed today. The Texas of the 1970s was not a perfect place, and like every era, it faced its own challenges and changes. Yet behind those challenges were millions of ordinary people building homes, raising families, and creating memories through simple daily routines. Their quiet lives became part of the rich history that still echoes across the state. If you could quietly walk through a Texas neighborhood on a warm evening 50 years ago, you might hear laughter drifting from a backyard, the gentle hum of a ceiling fan through an open window, and the distant chirping of crickets beneath a sky full of stars. It was a world that asked for nothing except your attention and your time. History is often remembered through famous events and well-known names, but much of the true story lives in ordinary moments. A family sharing supper, a rancher greeting the sunrise, a child riding a bicycle down a quiet street. These simple scenes shaped everyday life across Texas just as surely as any headline ever could. As our peaceful journey through the forgotten Texas of the 1970s comes to an end, we leave behind the dusty roads, quiet ranches, friendly towns, and endless skies. Though the decades have passed, their gentle rhythm still lingers in memory, reminding us that history is not only about great events, but also about everyday lives lived with care and purpose. Now, the stars shine softly above the Texas night one last time, and a gentle breeze moves across the open prairie, just as it did half a century ago. Thank you for taking this quiet journey into the real history of the 1970s, where ordinary people created extraordinary memories simply by living each day. As you relax and drift toward sleep, may the peaceful echoes of forgotten Texas remain with you until morning.